Hail and well met, Slayers of Giants. This week, my show is going to come out on Wednesday. It normally comes out on Mondays, pretty consistently. And so I'm not sure, does this video itself count as episode 181? I was just going to do a very short video and say the normal chapter of Tilting at Windmills, the serial novel, will come out on Wednesday. And then I started to think about, okay, there are a few things that I do want to share with you in the meantime. And the more I considered it, the more I thought about it, this may be episode 181. So we'll see how long this goes. We'll figure that out together. First of all, as my platform is exploding as a consequence of things outside of my control, I am realizing, okay, I need to professionalize this a little bit. So I need to create a theme song, a kind of welcome song, and an intro video that looks a little more polished, a little more professional. So I'll be working on that this week. But if anybody out there is an artist, would be interested in doing some art, please reach out to me. notapikepublishing@gmail.com. You're going to hear that a lot. I would love to have somebody who is an artist. I don't have a budget, so this would be fan art, which I don't feel super comfortable with. Artists should be paid, but if somebody out there is interested in doing something like that, let me know. I can tell you what I'm looking for. That could be very cool. Similarly, music. If nobody contributes any, I'm going to do it myself. And we'll see how that goes. So if you are interested in hearing a, amateur-made song, that's coming. But if you are somebody who is qualified, talented, professional, I would love to have better music than I am capable of creating. So reach out, let me know. The one big thing is I don't want to do anything that's AI. I know that folks do that to cut corners. I get it. I'm trying not to judge, but AI is, I write novels. Why would I be working with AI in any way? That's entirely, it's career self-destruction. So I'm not going to be using AI to do art. I'm not going to be using AI to do music. In the same way, I wouldn't be using AI to write books, because why feed the thing that is designed to confuse people about your art in the first place and ultimately replace you? It makes no sense. So I will not be doing that. Yeah, anybody out there who is interested in creating some real art, creating some real music, I would love to be in touch with you about that. Similarly, especially as we're going into this summer, this show, I used to do interviews with authors, and sometimes, folks who were in other art forms, and that was really fun, and I'd like to get back to that. And because we're in summer, and I'm a teacher, I've got more time. And so, especially this summer, I'd like to do the show maybe as often as twice a week. And, continue to do the chapters. That's actually been really good for me to be able to have that discipline, that kind of external structure. Got to get a chapter done every week. And so I want to continue that part of my practice. But I would also like to go back to interviewing folks in the style of Writers Not Writing. Folks who've been following the show know that Writers Not Writing used to be very lighthearted, just kind of, hey, get to know you as an author. What is it you like to write about? What is it that you do outside of your writing? And really the focus was, who are you as a person outside of your writing work, so that readers could get to know those authors and say, I feel a human connection, right? I firmly believe that is the way we're going to beat the bots, right? We're going to be able to say to readers, not only are you reading my book, but you're following me on social media, whatever, you know that I'm a real human being and you feel a connection. And so one of the things that I hope to do some this summer is share a little bit about my own books, just to say, now when you're reading this book, you know this person, right? I think that's valuable. I think that's important. We do this, we've done this with all kinds of other artists where we make their story a part of our experience of their art. So you find out about the personal life of the actor in the film that you're interested in and who she's dating and all that kind of stuff, right? that's that humanizing, right? So that if somebody said, oh, guess what? We're replacing her with an AI construct, you'd go, no, it's valuable to me. It's meaningful to me to know that this piece of artwork was created by human beings that I have come to have some kind of parasocial relationship with. So I think that's going to be all the more essential, all the more important for authors going forward to be out there. I've told this to authors. There once was a time when you could kind of hide and be an author who, sends your work off to your agent sends it off to the editor, your editor sends it off to the publisher puts it out into the world, and you could be hiding completely. And there were all kinds of problems with that. Lots and lots of gatekeeping involved, recognize. And at every step of that gatekeeping, there came with it the racism, the sexism, every gatekeeper who's saying, but we won't publish these kinds of voices, or I won't represent these kinds of voices, I don't edit these kinds of voices. And as a consequence, the people who could hide and still make it as writers were pretty much exclusively wealthy white men, right? Whose genius had been recognized by other white men. So that's, straight white men. So that is problematic, right? We don't want to go back to that. But the downside for authors now, and I think this crosses over into, every other art form as well, is that you can't do it in private anymore. And that was I shouldn't say every other art form. There were a lot of other art forms where that was never an option anyway. You couldn't be a stage actor and, do so in the privacy of your own home. But painters, sculptors, there are folks who didn't have those kind of performing arts, and they could hide in the background and let the art speak for itself was kind of the idea. Well, that really wasn't viable for most of the population most of the time, and now it's not viable for anyone, I think, because instead of competing with all the gatekeeping structures, you're competing with the rise of the robots. And if you are going to be out there saying you should be reading something by somebody who you care about, somebody who is human, then you need to be showing people, I am not a robot, right? I'm not a bot, I'm not AI. And that's going to be increasingly important. So I would like to go back to helping people show that they are not AI constructs, right? Helping authors introduce themselves to readers. That was fun. I think that's a valuable service. I think that's a valuable kind of show. So I'd like to get back to that. I never want to charge people to be on the show. That's important to me. Again, I have seen that model. I understand there are people who do that. They have their, I receive emails from these folks where they're saying, hey, come be on my show. All you have to do is pay the following amount. And trust me, lots of people will see your show and then buy books. No, it's not. Please don't do that, folks. These things are, each time I get one, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if there's any veracity to that model. And then you go to the show and you find out, no, it's somebody who's making their income doing 8 interviews a day, and they just toss them up. There's maybe a bunch of followers, but those followers probably aren't human, and the views are negligible, and I'm sure the sales are non-existent, right? Nobody is watching that show. And so if anything, if it's valuable to you to have that interview for yourself and then distribute it, maybe that could be of value, but that's not something I want to get involved in. I don't want to charge authors. That being said, if you'd like to advertise on the show, advertising I think is legit, right? And so if you are saying, I would like a shout out to my book, I would like a 30-second spot where you run an ad for my book that you've created, or where I toss up the cover and read some ad copy that you've written, if that's something you're interested in doing, now that I've got a lot more folks watching, you get a lot more eyeballs on your book cover. So if you're interested in doing something like that, by all means, reach out to me. So too many of these things are writer focused, but that's my gig. That's what I do. Not just as an author, but as a publisher. I am communicating with authors all the time and seeing how I can help them. So that is something I'd like to get back into. So again, if you are interested in being on the show or advertising your book or other artistic endeavor via the show, let me know, notapikepublishing@gmail.com. Now, why is it that you're not getting the chapter on Monday? Shouldn't forget to mention that. So a couple of folks in the comments have pointed out that they find it annoying that I am recording in a car sometimes, which I can understand. This is less than ideal. The nice thing about the car is the sound quality in the car is sometimes better than in my echoey apartment, because let's face it, all these surfaces around me are covered in fabric, right? So that is one thing that, it's not so bad. It is going to be less and less tenable. Today was 95 degrees. It's now, midnight and it's 81 degrees. This is not going to be something that's going to work through the summer. So Chris has been looking for other apartments here in the larger Portland area, and maybe we will be able to find something where I will have a space. So, well, we'll see if that pans out. But, we're not really in a financial position to be, moving into anything nice, even approaching mediocre. So looking for a very cheap apartment, but maybe one with a room that I could be working in rather than escaping from the family, so that I'm not keeping anybody awake, recording in the living room and continuing to record these for you. I should say, if I'm interviewing an author or something, I'm doing that via Zoom. I'm doing that at a scheduled time. That's not in the middle of the night, right? It's when I'm doing these in the middle of the night that it's going to end up being in my car if it's not in the apartment. So we're working on creating that better space. And part of that is somebody in the comments said, it really bothers me that you're like looking away and reading. I get that. And also, I'm not going to memorize a serial novel that I'm sharing with you, but there's a technological solution. So I am trying to, get my hands on a decent teleprompter, and I'll try that out this next week and see if reading the chapter, but actually being able to look at you, makes for a better viewing experience. So that's the big reason that we're waiting till Wednesday. The chapter is more than half written. I could have written it in time, but I don't have the piece of tech. It's on its way. So once that arrives, we'll try it out and we'll see how that goes and see if that makes for a better experience for the folks who are choosing to take the book in via YouTube. Of course, folks who are listening to the podcast, folks who are reading the text on Patreon or Substack, they don't care what is the mechanism by which I'm reading it, but hopefully that will be more enjoyable for those of you who are checking it out via YouTube. I should tease a little bit what is coming in Chapter 21, especially for those of you who have been following Brickgate. You're interested in what comes next. As I've mentioned in previous chapters, the book is a mechanism by which I can share what I can share when I'm not allowed to share it more directly, right? Through the fictionalized story, there will be some details in Chapter 21 that will be hidden. You will have to read between the lines, and I'll explain a little bit more about why you have to read between the lines in Chapter 21, but do come back and check that one out if you have been following the Brickgate saga and you are curious about what it's like for the human beings that are going through this, because it's not... I was on a show today with Chris and some wonderful hosts, very cool guys. It was really fun. But one of the things we were talking about together is when a story blows up in this way, it's easy to think of the characters in the story as mere characters, placeholders, right? They're chess pieces in this game that you are observing. And it's important not only for you to remember that the people involved are people, but for us to remember that the other people involved are people, right? And so, for example, when I'm dealing with people who are behaving poorly, let's say, it's important for me to remember these are human beings. And my guess is that when they are feeling attacked, when they are frightened, they are defensive, and that may make them make some poor decisions, that may cause them to double down when it would be in their best interest, if they were being purely rational, to handle things in very different ways. And so I remind myself, I have to remind myself, right? Everyone is doing the best they can. Everyone is doing the best they can. Maybe this is just as well as they can do, right? They don't know any better. Because if they knew better, they would do better, right? So that is something to remind yourself as you go into your week. And also it's something I have to remember. And I think learning about the people who are involved in this story will help all of us to understand the incredible complexity of it, right? This is a story where the complexity is only going to grow. And if we understand the people involved and remember that they're people, rather than walking into a store and punching somebody somewhere, which is not acceptable behavior, we will remember that the people involved are all doing the best they can. Some people just don't know how to do well, right? Some people don't even know how to make particularly ethical decisions, and we're seeing that. And so I'm not saying that there's, not some folks who are at fault, but the fault is, I think, for our own kind of mental health sake, it is best to attribute the fault to ignorance, fear, people who are behaving poorly because that's what they've been taught. And as we learn more about this story, we're learning about family dynamics that may have inclined some people to make some pretty sketch decisions. And maybe that's, the way they were brought up. And it certainly doesn't reflect well on whoever produced their upbringing. So keeping that in mind, I think chapter 21 will be helpful in humanizing some of the characters as you kind of read between the lines, because of course it will be about fictional characters, right? Right? So do check out chapter 21 when that one drops, because I think you will enjoy it. I think that'll be good. But in the meantime, there are a couple of things that I did want to talk about this week that are tangentially related, but I think if you string them together, there might be something here that's worth considering. One of those things is the film Disclosure Day. And you're going, what does Disclosure Day have to do with this? I want to state for the record, I do not believe Disclosure Day is some, prophetic metaphor for Brickgate. That would be ridiculous. Steven Spielberg did not know about our stolen store, right? But I think if you look at Steven Spielberg's career, there's a really interesting thread throughout where he is trying to catch the pulse of the time. And some of that is perhaps unintentional, just makes a good movie and that movie becomes zeitgeisty. But sometimes it's really active. It's really conscious. And this is the case if you see Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It's not just a movie about what happens when aliens come. It's really about living in the moment in, the late 70s when the president of the United States, Jimmy Carter, was going on TV and telling people, hey, we're running low on fuel. I need you to put on a sweater in the winter. And people were feeling like, this is what we've come to. Our country has just lost a war and our president is telling us we can't get enough fuel. We're not the dominant empire. This does not feel good. We need something. We need to believe in something greater than ourselves. And he used the metaphor of the potential alien saviors, right? Somebody to come in and rescue us. And then in the 80s, you get E.T. and you get this, everything seems great because we've got the kind of Reagan light on a hill. We've all been inspired, but it's about as substantive as the bond market, right? It was a gilded age, right? It seemed great, but it was bond traders and, American Psycho, right? This was not actually good. It just felt better. And in the midst of that, what if somebody came into our lives and we had to remember to care, right? And so here's E.T., right? And, Jurassic Park, what if, the kind of danger of corporatism run amok, right? People not considering the consequences of their actions. And in the midst of this, he's doing a lot of other things. We've got Amistad, we've got Schindler's List. Like, these were not trying to catch the pulse of the moment. They were historical. But if you see his War of the Worlds, I used to teach about this movie in my science fiction lit classes when I would teach the book, right? We would read the book and we would listen to the radio drama and we would, see some different versions, and we would watch Spielberg's. And Spielberg's War of the Worlds is a wonderful example of how you can use one text to talk about something very different. So he was not talking about, the fall of the British Empire in 1898, right? He was talking about 9/11. And if you see that movie and understand it's a 9/11 movie, oh my gosh, there's a lot going on there, because a lot of the choices he makes that are different from the book are really insightful commentaries on 9/11. The one that I think is easiest to miss, but I think is most important, is that the aliens do not come down merely from space. They come down from space in his film version, not in the book, into giant tripods that are already in the ground. Well, how's that a metaphor? I think Spielberg was saying the roots of violence in our society, of terrorism, are not merely external. And if we just other and say, oh, it's all out there, we're missing something. That the dangers to American society are in the ground. They're here in the United States already. And if we're not willing to see that, we won't know what's coming, right? We have to recognize that there are threats to our society that are extrinsic and intrinsic. And I thought that was a really brilliant twist in that movie. And then one of the great things you see is they start off referencing the independence movement in Algiers. The Robbie character, the son, who does not exist in the novel, right? This is 100 years later. He's decided to make it a father-son story. And the son has to do a paper about the war in Algiers, which is this independence movement, right? It's not some external threat to France. It's an independence movement because the external power is the Western European power. And the people of Algiers were, fighting back. And then that comes back later in the film when the humans realize, oh, we need to fight off our oppressors, right? This group that has technology that is more advanced than ours and has malice towards us or indifference and just wants to wipe us out, European colonialism style, right? Is now where the entire human race is at. And that comes back, and I think that was an idea that was very uncomfortable for a lot of Americans to really lean into in 2004, as we are, still in the midst of this and just getting out of this sense of, okay, 9/11 was cut and dry, right? 9/11 was the evil villains who, destroyed these buildings, and no connection to our own foreign policy, to our own imperialism, to, the fact that we have military bases in all these other countries, and we would never allow other countries to just go, we're sticking a bunch of military bases in your country, right? That asymmetry is uncomfortable because when we look at something like that, 9/11 terrorism, what made it so horrific is asymmetric warfare, right? Attacking civilians in their places of work with airplanes is horrific, right? And to then be forced to consider, oh wait, the asymmetry of an imperial power is also something that we need to acknowledge and recognize is horrifying. And turn the tables in that film so that the humans are part of the resistance, and also having to acknowledge maybe we're siding, if we're siding with the resistance, post 9/11, that might not be a really comfortable place for Americans to be. So a very clever film that was about, really catching the mixed feelings of 2004, right? Okay, cut to Disclosure Day. I'm not going to spoil, or I'm going to try not to spoil much of any of it. If you have not seen it, see it. And I think it's really worth your time. But if you've not seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind, see that first. Watch Close Encounters of the Third Kind, because I hope nobody considers this a spoiler. This is a sequel. This is a sequel to a movie made 50 years ago. It is the same universe. And it's saying something about our age pretty directly and explicitly, in the same way that Close Encounters of the Third Kind was talking about that feeling of malaise. Only this is tapping into a different feeling. And so the only thing that I'm going to reveal about the movie, and is, I think, safe to reveal, is the first, maybe 5 seconds. In the first 5 seconds, so this is not a huge spoiler, but in the first 5 seconds, our protagonist is watching a wrestling match. And that wrestling match is not important to the plot. Don't worry. It's just there for symbolic value, because really the character's going to leave from there and that's never going to be referenced again. So why a wrestling match? Why be at a professional wrestling match? Well, what we see in the very first shots of the film is a guy in red and a guy in blue, and they are play fighting, right? Which is not a knock on professional wrestlers. I know they are incredible athletes. It's hard to do. It's very, very hard to do what they do without hurting the other person, right? So I'm not knocking them for it being fake, but that as a metaphor for American politics, right? We have a red versus blue fake fight that we watch play out, and we struggle to get to believe that there could be something more substantive beyond that. And I mean, Spielberg, I don't think, is particularly subtle. Like, many of the fans have red hats, right? And their red baseball caps are, they have white writing on them that are for the wrestler that they are cheering on, right? And I think Spielberg is saying, here is this distraction. Here is this thing that people are interested in, but our protagonist is there for another reason, not the red versus blue fake match. And that has got me thinking about the situation that I can't talk too much about, too many details about, that we are all experiencing. So one of the things Chris and I were talking about today is the massive outpouring of not just support, but interest in this story is, awesome. I mean, don't get me wrong. That's been really cool. But also, we were kind of trying to break down the, why this story? Why is this catching on in this way? Because it has been overwhelming from our perspective. We're seeing it from inside and we're going, millions of people care about our little store that was taken from us. Why? And as I've mentioned before, yes, it's got all these elements. It's got, corporations, and it's got police, it's got all those other things. So I see why it is interesting, but I think there's this other element, and maybe folks have already analyzed this and shared this. Maybe this won't be an insight, but if you hadn't considered this, I think it's because we are living in a time where we are seeing a lot of things that we recognize just as transparently as this are wrong, right? Kind of on their face. This is wrong, but we don't have any sense that anybody's ever going to be held accountable, and we don't have a sense that they're ever going to end, right? And so it's nice to be able to confront this injustice that is discrete and say, okay, if I get involved, people are involved. People are going out there and actively seeking out information. They're, doing document requests. They're researching the hell out of this. And I think the reason they're willing to invest so much time is not just because they're fascinated and not just because they have those skills. They could be researching other things, right? I think they're researching this because they're going, I could have an influence on this. We could actually see some genuine justice as a consequence of all of these various people collaborating and investing their time. And I think they're seeing an opportunity to get beyond the wrestling match, right? To do something that feels substantive. Now, I don't personally think that politics should be meaningless, that it should be, a fake match. I think that, the ways that we hash out public policy really should matter. They should provide real solutions. People should see the real effects of, whoever wins the next election, you should see results. And if you don't see results, if you don't see the effects of those, or if you don't like the effects of those, you should be holding your leadership accountable, right? Regardless of, red or blue, regardless of which hat somebody is wearing. If they're not producing results, people should be saying, I'm looking beyond. But I think that in the case, what Disclosure Day shows is there is this desperate appetite for something that is more meaningful than fake fighting, right? And I think that we are also seeing that in our current situation, our much smaller situation. And I think that's where a lot of the energy is coming from. People are saying, if we kind of band together and produce all this information and the truth comes to light, we can do something about this. And I think that's exciting. That's very satisfying to see that coming together. Which brings me to something else. And this is also interesting and maybe trivia, but I think it's kind of cool. So I was watching a video by Hank Green, big Hank Green fan. Hank Green, by the way, writes science fiction novels. You should read them. They're really good. But he does, if you don't know Hank Green's work, he's a science explainer, largely. His YouTube channel, you can learn a lot. And he did one on the cost of plastics. Now follow me, because I know that seems tangential, but it turns out one of the reasons that we can't really ramp up and scale up the recycling of our single-use plastics, water bottles, that kind of thing, is that plastic itself is so cheap that you can't compete, right? You can't, if getting plastics out of the ground is so inexpensive that you just go, okay, we'll make this eternal garbage because it's so inexpensive, then convincing a market, hey, you should buy this barrel of melted down plastics from, soda bottles or whatever, instead of this thing that's even cheaper, you're going to have a tough time, right? And the reason that it's so cheap is fascinating. So our dependence on fossil fuel makes plastics cheap. Why? That's confusing, right? Well, it's because when you are pulling natural gas out of the ground, the kind of chemical compound that is used to make plastics is a byproduct. It's not something they want. They want the natural gas. But when you're pulling the natural gas out of shale, or you're trying to get oil out of shale, you end up with a lot of the chemical that you use to make plastics. And you can do two things with it. You can make plastics out of it, or you can burn it. And lots of places were doing that. And you'd see these big giant, gouts of flame shooting up into the air at these places that were pulling, what they really wanted out of the ground. And the government agencies said, that looks terrible, right? That is an environmental nightmare. Yes, it is an environmental nightmare, but turning it into plastics is not that much better than just burning it, right? Like, then you're shifting the problem, right? Now it's in dumpsters instead of burned up and destroyed in the atmosphere. But both are bad, right? But having all of that plastic now has pushed the price of plastic down so low that plastic, the chemical components that are necessary to make plastic are like $2 a barrel. They're less than the cost of the barrel, right? They're basically giving it away. They're saying, please take this off of our hands, make plastic out of it so that we can, continue to get the thing we really want, which is oil. And the the metaphorical part that this made me think of is silver. When you are mining for silver, you end up with lead as a byproduct. And, going back to ancient Rome, they were like, what are we going to do with all this lead? We really want the silver, right? But what are we going to do with all this lead? I guess we'll make, our amazing plumbing system because we've got this stuff essentially for free. It's a byproduct, right? And I was thinking about that as I was building a Lego set day before yesterday. One of the shifts that I noticed, for those of you who are Lego fans, you know this, you get a Lego set and inside it has bags. And in those bags, you've got your pieces. Well, Lego has switched so that the bags inside are paper rather than plastic. So you're not seeing what it is you're about to expose. So there's a little bit of a downside for you, or maybe that makes it, a little more fun. You're like, okay, what's in bag number 8, right? Which pieces? Oh, okay, this is what I'm going to build. But I think that this is a bit of outreach to and recognition on the part of the Lego Corporation that what they're selling is plastic, right? Most of, the business is plastic. And adding another layer of plastic around the plastic is one way that they could deal with this. But I'll bet, and I'm not positive, but I'll bet that choice to use paper rather than plastic is actually costing them something. Or it's causing them to increase the price of the box and pass that on to consumers. It's probably cheaper to put the plastic in plastic. And the plastic pieces that we are all using, that we all love, and don't get me wrong, I love Lego, and, I would argue Lego is the single best use of plastic, right? But the cost of plastic is so low that I think that should be part of this story. As we are thinking about this, is there's something perhaps metaphorical. I don't know if metaphorical is even the right word. There's something that is intrinsic to this story that can be learned from something that is both literal and symbolic. And that is the thing that is being fought over in this case is a Lego collection and a Lego franchising. And again, I'm going to try and speak in abstractions because I can't, there are things I can't say, but it should be noteworthy to us that we have almost layers of rent seeking. So we have one giant corporation in Lego that is producing, really branding on a underlying physical material that's nearly free, right? That the cost of the plastic, now I know they use a proprietary higher quality plastic. It's not like your plastic water bottles, but still those Lego bricks, they don't cost them as much as they once did. The cost of plastic is lower, right? And what they're really selling you is not the plastic. It's the artists, it's the designers, it's the engineers, it's everybody who's involved, and it's the Lego logo, right? And it's, knowing, and it's the fact that the pieces literally fit together, that the system allows those to work. It's keeping that in line, right? And that then becomes the product that's being sold to you. And again, love Lego, but that corporation's got to be making money hand over fist, right? Once you get the branding, once you get the system, then what you are continuing to sell is very inexpensive, right? And probably getting it to the store to you is a bigger cost than its production, right? And there's a metaphor there for franchising and the franchise system, right? If you can say to somebody, look, you could start an independent store and it would cost this much, or you can go with us, and if you do, it costs a little bit more because we take a cut, and what you get in exchange is maybe some discounts and some branding and some advertising. Then all you're doing on your end is the discounts, the branding, the scale, right? The benefits of scale. But you're not producing much in terms of benefit, it's rent seeking, right? Now, if you could then say, for example, take that back improperly and sell it again, it's almost pure profit, right? What a business model, right? Hey, if I can convince you to buy a car from me and then I can repossess it incorrectly and sell it to somebody else, wow, what a business model. But let's recognize that this is a business model on top of a business model that is, I don't want to say Lego's rent-seeking, but it's a very inexpensive product, and it's really branding, right? And so we've got branding on top of branding, almost rent-seeking on top of rent-seeking. And the actual labor, the people who are doing the work, are going to be, hammered by folks who are not really doing the work. They're doing the branding, right? And so I think that is interesting to go back to Disclosure Day, because it's one of those things where we look at that and we say, maybe not in the case of Lego, because we can appreciate what Lego offers, right? In terms of that systematizing, you wouldn't want your bricks to not fit with your other bricks because nobody's keeping an eye on making sure that they actually connect properly, right? But in so many other areas of our lives, we see this rent-seeking behavior where we're saying this person is not actually contributing. The person who owns your apartment building is not actually doing anything for you but owning, right? And I'll bet, depending on the kind of business you work in, there are folks who are in middle and all the way up into upper management who don't really produce much in the way of value. You do the work, and they just kind of keep everybody in line, right? And it's rent-seeking behavior. These folks are, in many cases, an annoyance to you at work because they're trying to prove that they are essential, right? Because they're really not, they're ownership class, right? They own the business and you do the work. And I wonder to what extent what we are seeing, whether it is the frustration that leads to the emotion of something like Disclosure Day, like this desperation for answers to come from the outside, or what folks are dealing with in this particular situation that that brought you all here, right? Or brought so many of you here, is really one and the same, where we are looking at, late stage capitalism, and we're saying we are tired of the people who don't actually produce a whole lot of value reaping all the rewards, and we wish somebody would come in and magically solve that problem. Right? We wish the aliens would arrive. And instead, folks are saying, here's a case where we can actively get involved and see a result, see some justice. And I think that is part of the motive, is people are saying we are sick of seeing people who don't actually produce value taking advantage of the people doing work. And so that is, I hope, inspiring to you going into this next week. I hope that that's something you will consider and say, if we can believe that we can find justice in this case, if we can believe that our collective action, if we can believe that getting organized can make a difference in this case, why do we allow ourselves to believe that it can't in other cases? Right? We literally can employ these same skills to solve even more substantive problems than the injustices we are seeing here. And I hope you will believe that, because one of the key things to recognize is if we believe that, it becomes true, right? If we believe we can solve problems together, we can solve problems together. The key for keeping a group of people from creating a more just system is making them believe that it's impossible for them to make a more just system. And I think that we can learn from this that people, when given the opportunity, will do really remarkable things to bring about justice. So I am hopeful, as much as this has been awful and a beatdown, and those of you who've been following the book know that it has been a really, really terrible experience. This is not something I would wish on my worst enemy. I wouldn't wish on anyone involved in this situation, right? This has been awful. I would never do what has been done to me to anyone, right? This has been really, really terrible. I wouldn't do it back. And I think that's important for folks to understand. Like, having experienced this, I would never want this for anyone. But on this end of it, it is inspiring to see people coming together to do something about it. And so I hope that we can take some lessons learned about not just organizing, but about believing that we can achieve some kind of justice in this situation, and say, what are some other situations where we could come together and we could organize, and people's collective action could really make a difference in problems that are bigger than the store that I co-owned being stolen, right? There are bigger things. This is, thank you. I don't want to say to anybody, oh, this is unimportant. It's hugely important to me, right? And I'm so grateful that you have seen this and said, hey, we can do something for people other than ourselves, right? For the other folks involved who have also been ripped off, right? But I hope that we can go beyond that even and say, what are other circumstances where we could be a help in this same way to others who are facing different kinds of injustice that are related, really, right? So go see Disclosure Day, recognize that it is a metaphor, and then I'm going to encourage you to think about Brickgate as a metaphor as well, right? How could we make Brickgate a metaphor for even bigger, more meaningful change? On that note, I'll wrap it up. But again, if you want to participate in, helping me out with a song, some visual art, or you want to be a guest on the show, or you want to, and go back, this is another thing I tell authors all the time. If you're invited to do a podcast, go listen to some other ones. If you're wanting to be on a, YouTube show, go watch some other ones so that you can decide, is this really something that fits me, that I would enjoy? Go check them out. And if you see some early episodes of Writers Not Writing, or, some of the ones as we got a little more activist in the early days of Tilting at Windmills before I started doing the serial novel, let me know which kind of show you would like to do, and if you'd like to be a guest, and we can get some more of those scheduled. And of course, if you are saying to yourself, I am not a novelist, I am not a songwriter, I am not, a musical artist or whatever, I don't know why I would go on that show, but I'm liking the show, let me know who you'd like to have on as guests. Whether that's in general, I want to see more, comic book artists, or I want to see more singer-songwriters or whatever. Who is it that you want to have more on the show? And I can aim for that. So I really appreciate your suggestions in the comments there too. I will keep the novel coming, I promise. And I will continue to keep the novel layered and revealing things for those of you who are reading between the lines, because I really appreciate that. But the other shows where I'm going to do some interviews, let me know if you want to be one of them, or who you'd like to hear and see on the show. So, notappipepublishing@gmail.com. Let me know what you're looking for. Thank you very much. I will see you all on Wednesday.